On January 20th, 2020, just about a year ago, a patient in the state of Washington was diagnosed with an infection identified as severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, a virus that we now have come to know simply as COVID. From that time, our country, our world, has struggled to manage. And you all know this. We all know this. We've lived through it. We've lived through the new terminology, right? Social distancing. We don't leave our cell phones and we don't leave our little mask. Our lifestyle has radically changed. And the church has not been spared from this. Since we, the church, are in the world and we function in the society, we are therefore impacted by it. And it's a health issue that knows no limitation as to who it can reach out and infect. Some congregations have been more affected than others. In some states, even within the Metroplex, I know some congregations have struggled more so than others. But nevertheless, overall, the Lord's church is struggling, just like society, with COVID and how to find their way forward. I won't ask for a show of hands, but it's possible that some of you know someone or have lost family members due to COVID. We know some individuals personally that died from that. COVID is very real. The medical consequences of it are very real. So still, also, even those of us that may not know people directly, we know of people that have dealt with it. Some that currently have it and are recovering. Some that are medically at very high risk of getting it, and the consequences, if they get it, are medically an unacceptable risk for them to face. So many challenges associated with that. And, you know, back in January, we thought that come September, October, we'd all be back to normal, right? And here we are, unknowing what 2021 will bring concerning that. Our society is struggling not only with COVID and that virus and the complications associated with it, but also from what I call the side effects of COVID. And we, the church, are not insulated from this either. And we have to resist the tendency to be influenced by society in which we live. Now, what are some of these side effects? This is an article that was published in the Washington Post on November 23rd this year. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 young adults thought about killing themselves in the past 30 days at the time of that article. Young adults are struggling with suicidal thoughts since the pandemic has hit. The impact of children not being able to go to school, the virtual learning at home versus being in school. And if you think about it, children, if you have a less than desirable home life, for many of those, school was an escape. And now there is no escape. This is one example. 40% of Americans now are struggling with either mental health or drug-related issues. Again, young adults are being hit the hardest. And in this report, 75% of them reported that they were struggling with that. Other articles and resources talk about the impact on the elderly, and we all may know people that are dealing with this. Not just the elderly, but especially those that are in places of assisted living or nursing homes. The sense of depression that's come about caused by the isolation brought about trying to control and manage through this COVID. Decreased physical and mental activity for the elderly. We all know that bears no good fruit. And this isolation is causing increased problems, not just for the elderly, but for all of those that have been impacted. So what has been the impact on the church? Understanding that we have members that fit each of those categories. And this is what I call an informal statistic. There have been some writings out there in different information that's been put out and shared in the brotherhood, but sort of informally from congregations that I know and talk with, this holds true. There's really three categories of people affected by this within the church. And I'm going to say, for discussion purposes, is roughly a third. And again, this varies. It varies by time, and it varies by congregation and location, but roughly, there's a third of the congregation, we'll say, that really isn't affected. They are still attending church. They're still active. They are living their life. They're still going to work. They're still doing all of those things, albeit in a more controlled and more cautious environment. Hand sanitizers, the masks, and those things that have been deemed to be good actions to take. But they are still active and physically worshiping in person when circumstances are allowed, and that being when the congregations are open. So that's one category, and we'll say that's a third. The other third are the people that either are medically high risk, and they are isolating at home. They are essentially shut in for all practical purposes. They are either have contracted COVID and are dealing with that, or they have medical issues or other things that consider them to be a high risk. So it's very prudent for them to remain in a isolated situation to avoid the risk of getting that. And also there are those that out of concern for either family members that they may be caretakers for or other things, they have found themselves in a similar isolation or a shut-in environment. For example, if I were taking care of an elderly parent or grandparent, then I have to be more concerned about what I may come in contact with, not for my own health, but for the health of the person that's living with me that I'm caretaking for. So that's the third category. The second category. The third category are the people, and again, we're talking within the church and the assembly, they're just absent. They are the people that they're still going to work, still maintaining a normal lifestyle, but because of various situations associated with COVID and some of the things that is happening in society, then they're absent from here. They're absent from us. And since this has been brought about in part because of the reduced risk, the reduced sense of importance and value of the assembly. And one of the things that we must remember is, and we all recognize that the assembly is important, but we also must recognize that we are in a storm. Our society is in a storm. We're in a battle. And brethren, our battle isn't with COVID. Our battle is with Satan. And he is the one responsible for this, but his hand is in it. Now, what can we do? First of all, this we need to know. God is in control. But our challenge is, how do we move forward? And the church has always had the decision to make when times are hard, in periods of persecution. We can retreat. We can retreat to what we consider to be the security of our own homes, or we can continue to find a way, albeit perhaps a new way, to go about doing the Father's business. Secondly, we know God is in control, and now more than ever, we need, all of us, to be engaged. And hence the topic, this is a time for all hands on deck. All hands on deck, it's a naval expression, and hands is a nautical term for sailors, and the deck is simply like the top side of the ship. And going back, and this originated around the 1700s, but the captain in times of a storm, and if you imagine these are old sailing ships, and with all the rigging and mast and all of the effort that was required to manage the control and the steering of the ship in times of a storm, they would call for all hands on deck. That meant that every able-bodied person had to come up on the deck, and then they had assigned roles that they engaged in. Also, it was used in times of emergency. If there was an enemy trying to onboard the ship, then it was all hands on deck, because every person was essential to repel the enemy. Every person in times of storm, every person was essential to battle the elements, battle the enemy, whatever it was. The all hands on deck was a cry to action, a battle cry, if you will. And brethren, I believe, looking at what the church has endured and what we are facing and what we have faced, I believe that now, perhaps more than any time in recent memory, that this truly is a time for an all hands on deck for the Lord's church. And exactly what do we mean by that? First of all, let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, because we have got to understand what Scripture teaches and what God teaches about the importance of each member and that relationship. So 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Now we'll be beginning in verse 12. For just as the body is one and has many members, and this is talking about the physical body, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. And remember the message we heard this morning, right? We're all in, all, right? There's no socioeconomic levels within. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, what your ethnicity is. We are all in this together. For the body does not consist of one member, but many. And this is where we start talking about each individual person in the Lord's church. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. So when we think about those three categories of members, right? Three categories of our brothers and sisters right now that are dealing with COVID, right? There's the one group that's here, us. There's the people that aren't here because of medical issues. And then there's those that are absent. So with that in mind, just because one of those categories feel that they're not important, in God's eyes, they are still important. And if it's important to God, it's important to us, right? And if the ear, verse 16, and if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? And what that's telling us is what? It's telling us that each part, though different, still has an importance. It has a unique job to do. The ear, the eye, we need them both. We need everything that each member brings into the body is important. If the whole, but as verse 18, but as it is, God arranges members in the body, each one of them as He chose. You know, sometimes we may get disappointed, or we look around and we see others that can do more, others that are doing things that we wish we could do. And while it's good to want to grow and to strive and to learn and to do more things, sometimes, brother, I think we need to just take a look and see, what has God blessed me with? What skills and abilities? And how can I plug that into the work of the church? Because whatever God gave me, this just tells me here that what skills and abilities I have, He gave them to me. He gave them to me. So how can I plug that into His work? God arranged the members of the body, each one of them as He chose. Verse 19, if all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. And again, when we think of how the physical body works, yes, there are those that, due to unfortunate circumstances, they don't have, they're missing a limb, or they're missing an organ, they're missing something. And are they able to function? Yes. But in God's plan for the church, he wants every member to be engaged because every member is important for their specific role. The eye, verse 21, the eye can't say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, and what that's telling us, and let's not diminish the significance of that. I'll read that again, verse 21. The eye can't say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. So we either intentionally or otherwise, we can't look at some of our brethren and say, we don't really need them. Okay? And all too often, the Lord's church, I have seen where we sort of prioritize who is important. We prioritize who we're most concerned about. And it's not what this verse tells us, right? We can't tell anyone that they're not important because God has just told us that everybody's important. And I'm going to follow up with that here in a minute. And so, and continuing on, and listen to this. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. What does indispensable mean? You can't do without it. So the parts that to us seem not so important, seem weaker, may seem inferior, really, they're indispensable. And they're indispensable from God's plan for the church. His view, right? God's ways, his wisdom is not our ways. He knows how the Lord's church, how the Lord's body should function. And he knows that everybody is important. Each member is important. And we, in our secular wisdom, sometimes think that we know more, we know better. Verse 23, and on those parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow the greater honor, and our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that members may have the same care for one another. That there be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care one for another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. That's God's plan. So now let's step back and think about, right? So there's a third of us that we're here, but we've got a third of our body that is confined to home. They're suffering. So we should be suffering with them. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Verse 27, now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. There's three key elements in that teaching that I believe are important, equally important. First of all, each individual member, we each must recognize that we have value to the body of Christ and to the local church specifically. Each of us. And when I say each, it's the third that's here, it's the third that's confined to home, and it's even our wayward brothers and sisters that may be absent and may be drifting. Everyone equally has value in the church. Each member must also accept that we have a responsibility, not to the church only, but to other members. We have a responsibility to the others. The passage we just read tells us we have that responsibility for each member. And again, as we're thinking of the different categories, we must, out of sight, out of mind. I've seen that happen in the Lord's church in the last year. Okay, the members that aren't coming are the people that, due to, in some areas, there has been serious financial impact. I don't know about here, but I know families that have had to leave their homes and go move in with other people because of lost income. okay, they're suffering. And we should suffer with them. So the first element is each member recognizes and understands their value to the body and their responsibility. Secondly, each member must recognize the value of the other member. We are all equal in value to God. And when one of us hurt, when one of us struggles, then we struggle with them if we are being who God has called us to be. And then thirdly, church leadership must recognize the importance of engaging each member in the work of the church and the local congregation. And oftentimes this is done through surveys or Bible questionnaires that members fill out to indicate what their interest is. There's different ways it can be done. But the challenge is to engage every member, right? So the first thing we said is that members recognize that they do have value and they recognize they have a responsibility. And so the other part of that is in plugging them in. And a note to members, there are always those members, and we thank God for them, that are the workers that, they answer every bell. They answer every call for work. But sometimes we, in our humanistic perspective, we get kind of possessive with the Lord's work, don't we? And what I mean by that is we look at it more as that's my work than the Lord's work. A specific example I can think of is I may have been the 5th and 6th grade Bible class teacher for 15 years. And there's some other people who like to teach because that's an area but that's my work. I'm the teacher, right? That does not help the body. So let us be aware and let us resist that temptation. Now, why do I say that we're in a battle with Satan over this COVID thing? And it's not a medical thing, it's a battle with Satan. Okay? Satan is deceiving us in thinking, first of all, that social media is all we need to be connected. Okay? You may engage with people, with our other members, through social media, and it's good to stay connected through that, but that is not a true connection. Okay? Sending someone a thumbs up on a comment, or sending them a post, I'm thinking of you, that in itself, that's not staying connected. And I would challenge you, and I've shared this with friends before, but I've found myself posting someone was going through a struggle and saying, I'll pray for you, and then I went with something else, and you know what? At the end of the day, or the next day, I realized I didn't pray for them. It's so easy to do that, isn't it? Or send the little, whatever you call it, the icon or emoji, little hands praying. Satan is telling us that's okay. That's good enough. My challenge to me, and I would say my challenge to you, is before you respond on social media saying that you are going to pray for somebody, before you do it, you say the prayer. And if you can't do it then, well, then you don't send the statement saying you are. And if it's 3 hours later or at night when you're halftime and you're going through thinking over the day and then you pray for them, then you send that and say that you're praying for them, right? Satan is tempting us also, okay? Satan is tempting us that the physical assembly isn't really necessary anymore. Now, I know in college days there was a sort of a running joke about if you you missed your friend at church and missed you at church Sunday. Oh yeah, I went to church at Box Springs. The Box Springs Church of Christ, well, it was Box Springs until they slept in, okay? We expect that with immature Christians. We understand that. But now, what has happened is becoming the norm is it's okay to sleep in because worship on the sermon, well, it's on DVR. You can DVR it, or you can get it at any time. So you don't have to set aside a specific time to worship. You can do it at your convenience. Satan is telling us that sofa services, what I call it, right? Sitting on your couch in your pajamas, watching worship, sofa services are perfectly fine. We don't need to be in the physical assembly if we're in the virtual assembly. That's what Satan is telling us. We can worship anywhere, we can take communion anywhere, and then what else comes into mind? Well, I can do that, and well, I don't really like some of the songs they sing, or I don't like this or that, or so I can worship God my own way, and he's going to be just as pleased. That's Satan. That is Satan. And a self-reflecting question here for us. Since the pandemic, most of us have been home more. Since we have been home more, are we watching more TV, more Netflix, or are we studying more? Are we taking that extra family time we have? Are we doing things of a spiritual nature with our family, or are we doing more socially recreational things? All those basketball games and football games that we didn't get to watch, what did we fill that time with? Studies indicate, and the people that have talked about it out there, again, this is relying on social media, but we didn't fill all that time with things of a spiritual nature. No. We just remain distracted. There was not an increase in family devotions. And again, there's exceptions, and I know that you recognize that. But as a general rule, a general statement, we didn't increase our devotional studies to God. We didn't increase the extra amount of time that we gained. We didn't give that to the Lord. So what is Satan's goal in all of this, ultimately? What is his goal? And what is the risk that we have in the church caused by COVID? It's separation. Satan wants to separate us from God and separate us from his people. That's what he wants. What does sin do? It separates us from God. What does a distraction that in itself is not a sin, but if it allows us to be separated from God, isn't the end result the same thing? We're separated from God. COVID may not be a sin. It's not a sin, but it is surely separating God's people. And it is distracting us from what we really should be about. Regardless of the circumstances, we must continue to be about the Father's business. In Scripture, we read about the illustration about we are sheep among wolves, right? So, a little National Geographic review here. How does wolves attack their prey? They go after the weak, they go after the sick, they go after the old, and they separate them. They separate them from the flock, and then they pounce. How does Satan come after us? He wants to separate us. Separate us from God's people, separate us from God. Whatever is coming between you and God, or whatever is coming between you and God's people, beware. Beware. We must all remain connected to God and connected to God's people. And we need to strive to remain connected to God's people, even if we're not physically connected. Again, a reference back to the passage we read talking about the relationship between the members of the body. So important. So I have a few suggestions. And there are plenty more, but some suggestions on how we stay connected. And it's important that whatever group you're in, right, those three different categories, and let's remind all of ourselves that I may be here today. Next week, I may be home confined because I have COVID. I may be here today. A month from now, I may be one of those that's just conveniently absent. So we all have the risk of being in one of those groups. if we are the people that are here and able to be in person attending, physically active, and going about a normal lifestyle. Remember that worship in the assembly, the singing, worship is singing, praying, and the Lord's Supper together, and the preaching. And let me also make a side note here. Giving is important. Giving isn't just important to support the work of the church, but giving is how we also get a sense of connection. Okay? When we give, that's one more way that we remain connected. And you know, it's not about the amount. We know that. It's not about the amount. We think about the widow, right, and the 2 mites. It's not about the amount, but it is about remaining connected to the work of the church through our means. And I encourage you, if you have undergone a financial hardship or in the middle of financial hardship, still find a way to give something, even if it is a dollar bill, because you are still giving and you still maintain that connection. And in so many of these things, once we disconnect, it's hard to reconnect. If we have the blessing and the ability to be here in person, other things that we need to do and consider is go visit. We need to go visit that other group of people that are confined at home, the shut-ins. Now, we know we can't go in person inside their homes, but what you can do is you can go and visit them from the front porch. Go make that connection. Drop off a care package. Reach out. Physically, don't let the situation allow you to have an excuse to not go and do that which we know we should do. Going and visiting from a social distance. Take items that help. Take the Heart to Heart magazine that you get. There's many, and I realize this in the last several months, but in talking with some of the elderly people we have at our congregation, a lot of the elderly people, they're not really tech savvy. And if they have been put in a situation where they don't have family members that can do it for them, people like in assisted living places like that, they may not have any way of getting electronic media that we push to them. Some of them are very appreciative of the old printed bulletin. And so, we started sending the printed bulletin to some of those because that's the only way they had a sense of connection with the church. Sending cards. Now, I know that today, we don't send a card, we send a social media thing, right? I'm curious. I would imagine most of us have a card that someone sent us that we've held on to for maybe years. I came across a card the other day that was in my drawer that my wife had given me for my birthday. My children have cards that church members previously sent them and had words of encouragement on it. A card, it has a benefit and a blessing when the person reads it, but they can go back and read that again. It's a great connection. Phone calls. Phone calls to people. Hear your voice. Don't just delegate it to a text. Call them. Let them hear your voice. You can communicate encouragement through a phone so much better than you can just the printed word. Reach out. Reach out to those people that we know are home. We know they're shut in because of medical situations. Let's reach out and let them know that we want to help. See what needs they may have. And then you can talk to the other people that are able to go about normal businesses or normal affairs and help them out. Take communion to them. And again, you can, and it's more than dropping off the little, emblems. Go by, and again, you can, from a front porch, they can be at their door, and you can stand 6 feet away, and you can pray with them. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you felt, or you were struggling and you needed the prayers of someone and someone came and prayed with you. It makes your soul swell with joy. And we can bring that same joy to those people that are trapped essentially in their homes. To the people that are homebound, to the people that are in that situation, again, beware. Satan is lurking. You can't control the medical situation that you're in, but you still can control the connection. If you're physically able, and I'm talking to the people that are again at home, or if we, heaven forbid, end up in that situation, we can send cards from home. We can make phone calls from home. We can do those things from home. We don't need to be at home and sort of put our spiritual growth and our family relationship on pause while we're dealing with this. So we have to make a conscious effort that we're going to be engaged, that we're going to stay connected. All of the things that we just talked about, the phone calls, the cards, those things, we can do that from home. Also recognize that reaching out to the people that aren't what we're calling absent, they're not confined to home, they're just absent. We need to reach out to them in love. And I appreciated the comment of one of your elders this morning. He's saying that it doesn't matter what we do, we've got to have love. If we don't have love and we take care bags to every person in Flower Mound, Scripture tells us it's rubbish, right? We've got to have love. And when we show that love to our brothers, our other and sisters, our other members, as we just read, when we show that love, it strengthens the body. And when each member is strengthened, then the whole body is strengthened. And then we start to become that light in the community. Then we start to become more so who we're called to be. And for all of us, we need to remember that Satan, he works just like the wolves. Okay? He seeks to separate us from God, from God's people. Let's not let him separate us and our family. Seek out ways to engage with other Christians. Remember the importance of Christian companions, Christian fellowship. Let all of us look to see what our skills, what our talents are, and find ways. It's going to be creative ways, but find ways that we can engage in the work of the church. We all have talents. We all have abilities. And it doesn't matter if your ability is changing a light socket and somebody else's ability is overhauling an engine, right? They're two each on the different spectrum of mechanical abilities, but they're equally important. Because if the mechanic that overhauls the engine doesn't have any lights to see what he's doing, it really doesn't matter, does it? So we are all linked together, not only in the family of God through the salvation of Jesus, offered through Jesus, but we're linked as a body with different skills and different abilities. But that is God's plan. And let us not let Satan pull that from us. I mentioned in the beginning, people are dying from COVID. COVID is real. And I know that there's a lot of misinformation. And that's just Satan trying to get us all trapped up and wrapped up in all of that stuff. Again, it's distractions, right? COVID is real. People have died from it. And we always have said, we don't know if, what tomorrow will bring. We may not make it home. Well, that's true, but with COVID, it's a month from now, some of us may not be here due to that. And that's a risk. And if you're not right with God, now's the time to think about that. But you know, the greater risk, COVID is the thing that pulls most of us away from God, or, you know, unforeseen tragic accidents that you know, snatches us from God, or from before we can make the decision to get right with God. What is it? It's a hardened heart. And there may be some of us that we know we're not right. We know we're not where we need to be. But Satan keeps telling us, it's all right. It's all right. He keeps telling us ways to make excuses. And the fear and the concern is, while you know it's not right now, there may come a point to where you're hardened and you no longer care. And then you're lost. Very appropriate song, Is Your Heart Right with God? And if it's not, you know, there are people here that will study with you, pray for you, pray with you. Wonderful people, knowledgeable people that have wisdom to help you overcome whatever struggle you're facing in your life. But if your heart is not right with God, do what you need to do now as we stand and sing.